Good evening. Our group will present our group project about allocating general overhead costs to construction projects. So I'm Wenting, and this is my group member Alfonso and Lee. So our group project is mainly about two parts. The part one is about investigation about how a local construction contractor deal with its general overhead. The part two is about the activity-based costing system.
Actually, we interviewed two companies. The first one is the leading construction company in the industry, which is Morrison, and the second one is a small company, construction company, which is just outside the campus. The interview question. The first topic is about the overhead cost and the new construction environment, the relationship between these two. And we asked several questions. What's the ratio of the general overhead to the total revenue in a year in a company, and the general overhead ratio for the whole industry? And is there any difference between the big company and the small company? For these questions, the professor gave us the answers that the ratio for the general overhead to overhead ratio is 3.5% of the total cost. And ratio might vary from companies to company. For example, if you are a small company, your ratio might be higher because you are not able to get that much job within a year. The second part of the question is related to the new construction environment. Does the change construction environment make an impact on the general cost? How do you think they are related, and what's your opinion of this change? The professor gave us the answers that the change construction environment did has an impact on the general overhead, and it is actually a large impact. The change construction environment here means the using for the beam or the chasing for the lead certificate. Because if you want to use the beam, you have to purchase certain software, the hardware, you have to have certain rooms to put all the equipment inside, and all of this will cost a lot of money. And if you want to purchase for the lead, you have to hire the construction consultant. You have to hire people to do the project evaluation and analysis before the bidding. And most of the general contractor will put this money into their home office overhead because they don't want to increase the total cost for the project so that they can win the bid. And the conclusion. We have the conclusion that the new construction environment has a large impact on the overhead costs. And for this part, we raised the conclusion that we hope regulation could be set up to make the market more fair. Like if all the construction companies agree that the change environment costs should be put into the job oversight costs, so that the construction company will lower the general overhead costs. And also we hope that the companies should adjust their costing systems, which means that they should be more aware of how their competitors are doing. For example, the Morrison says that they think that they should decrease the cost spent on the quantity takeoff. They say that in Morrison, a small construction project usually take for estimator 2 weeks to do the quantity takeoff. And considering that one estimator is $160 per hour, this is actually a large sums of money. However, the other competitors, the other construction company are using the software, which actually decrease the job for the quantity takeoff, and also decrease the home office overhead cost. And that is the second part.
So the topic 2 is about overhead cost allocation to project costs. The interview questions we raised is just based on our project description. The first one is, what departments do you have in your home office? So for the Melanie Electric, they have the estimating department, and for the Morrison, they have lots of departments in their home office, such as estimating, scheduling, accounting, business development, senior management, administrative support, and safety. So the second question is related to the first one. As for the way the company allocate their general overhead to the project. So the way they allocate the overhead costs is they only allocate the overhead costs of the department which provided the service to that project. So if the department from home office want to allocate their costs to the project, so they should actually truly work on the project. Otherwise, their costs will not be covered. So for the conclusion, generally the way to allocate overhead costs to the project cost is using the total general overhead divided by the total amount of project, and then allocate them to each project. So some companies might also generate a specific percentage of volume or revenue that the project contributing to the business at their overhead rate. So these two ways might be the easiest and the cleanest way to allocate the overhead cost. So for the larger companies, they might anticipate the certain amount of cost that will allocate to the project, but it will just be a partial amount. They will only allocate the cost to the project for those overhead service as the service have been provided directly to that project. And the second conclusion we have is the small company usually has higher overhead costs because they don't have many projects on their side. So it's for the part 2.
For part 2, we are focusing on activity-based costing system. It can be used with general accounting techniques and ledger ways of costing. It is used to give a better picture of what the pathways and reasons for the cost are. We'll have a small example here at the end, and we'll also talk about Mortensen's use of activity-based costing. They do not use it, and they use instead percent revenue and historical data. How does it work? Activity-based costing is a way of focusing in on the type of use of the resources that you have for each activity. So this lens removes typical volume-based approaches that fail with mainly using labor hours, and in finding this detailed view, it also provides pathways for money expenditures. Where's the money going? Which are incredible tool for management. They could better allocate where their resources come from and go to. So the tools for activity-based costing are very simple. There is a process whereupon you list activities and their definition for your use, and you can measure these activities and their and how they define the system overall through their cost drivers. So there's cost objects and cost drivers. The cost driver can be said the factor that changes an activity from the perspective of the vendor or the contractor, or even from an office perspective, home office perspective. Successive iterations or long-term use of this activity-based costing system is going to give you better results. You're going to have less possibility of error introduced in short-term analytics. So it's very much recommended that this is implemented for longer than 5 years to get a good use of activity-based costing for your product, for your services. We have here a simple example to dive into activity-based costing and how it's viewed and how it works. In this example, we have a vendor that has sells hot dogs, and so to in order to make these hot dogs, he needs 2 materials, the buns and the wieners, and a certain, what we're going to think of as the overhead, the propane to cook these. And we have a certain cost for these items, given here as 20, 30, and 50 respectively. And then he sells, we're told he sells $100 at $1 each. Now, traditionally, we could divide the 4 items that he sells by the total cost of buying, of stocking up these items, giving you a quarter of the cost. I just realized I have a typo here, but it's a quarter of the cost of which would be a wrong way to look at it. So the difference is that activity-based costing not only recognizes that propane is the overhead, because you would have to always buy a hot dog and always buy a bun to sell hot dogs, obviously. So the propane is the key cost you need to allocate into future endeavors and focus on. So not only could you do this by measuring how many hot dogs do you get per propane tank, or how much the fluctuation of the propane is in line with the fluctuation of sales, or something like that. Better allocating your resources. In the example of Mortensen, it seems to be more focused on the estimating department, which could employ up to 8 full-time employees at 40 hours per week, giving you up to 2,000 hours a year. And as Lee Lin pointed out, it's a substantial cost on a bidding process. And for them, even although they do not use it, they would greatly benefit from implementing long-term activity-based costing. And that concludes our video. Thank you, Dr. Kim.